have to say thank you again so we're having tech issues with our signals. So our screen works great. Yours are all pixelated. And a lot of it has to do with this little guy right here that's broadcasting to the interwebs. And I would shut it off, but there's quite a few people who watch this every single week at home. Like some weeks 30, 40 people watch it. Then we got some folks that, raised their hand. And so we're going to figure it out, but right at the end of my sermon, I have this wonderful video I want to show you about these two little girls. And so I'm going to take a pause and shut it off so that you can all watch it. I'll shut this off. And so we'll make it all work. A lot of moving pieces. We know the solution. We just have to get there, which is hardwiring everything. So we'll get there. So if you're watching online, thank you for watching. And our folks here are watching pixelated stuff. So anyway, with that, we're going to continue this series called The Art of Neighboring. And, this idea where Jesus says, love your neighbor, right? Love God and love your neighbor. And it's one of those things that seems difficult, as we saw in our children's sermon, right? Our children's moment. That would take forever. There's so many people. And so I love little kids because they see that literal thing. How do we do that? How do we love people, the entire world, so that they'll change from being bullies or jerks or people that treat people bad to being kind and loving people? How do we do that? And so as good adults, we often just sort of spiritualize it, right? We say, well, obviously Jesus didn't really mean that, so it's got to be more spiritual. Or when we get to heaven, it'll be that way, but not now. And we learned already in this series that Jesus really meant that, to love your neighbor. And not some narrow definition of neighbor, but a wide, broad neighbor that includes every single person on this planet. And so last week we looked at loving the millennial generation, right? Loving those younger than us and the challenge that is. Well, this week I want us to look at those unexpected neighbors, those unexpected visitors, those people in our life that maybe we have written off as maybe not unlovable, but not so lovable, right? Or just a bit difficult to love. Those unneighborable people, if you will. And so you might think, well, I've never done that. I haven't written anybody off. But I want you to think for a sec. Who are those people that really bug the heck out of you? Who are those groups of people that you just cringe? Right? Think about those groups. And if you're not sure if you could put a name on them or a face, think about when the news comes on and a topic comes up that just makes you cringe because you can't believe there are people out there that think that way. How dare they, right? Maybe those are the people. You see, we will always come across people that are difficult to love. And I love this example in the Gospel of Luke between Jesus and Zacchaeus. And so in Luke 19, Jesus is entering Jericho. Jericho is this wonderful, prosperous city on the way up to Jerusalem. You always go up to Jerusalem because it's up on a hill, but it's on the way. One author said that it was this wonderful, prosperous city with great palm forests and balsam groves, and the air was perfumed for miles around. There was gardens of roses. People called it the city of palms at the time. Josephus, the historian, called it a divine region, the fattest in Palestine. So Jesus is coming into Jericho, and there's this man there named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector and was wealthy. So who is Zacchaeus besides a wee little man, as the old Sunday school song said, or a short guy, this little short guy? Who was he? Well, first he was Jewish. He was Jewish by birth and possibly by faith. He probably grew up, went to temple, did all the things, went to synagogue, etc. He is a Jew, but the Jews probably didn't think of him as one of them. He was an outsider. Why? Because of his career, his greed, his collusion with the Romans. Those all forced him outside his community. He was a ruler, so he was a boss of tax collectors, right? I don't know what that exactly meant. He's a chief of tax collectors. So maybe he had a whole crew of collection agents that worked underneath him. And he was wealthy. Most tax collectors wouldn't necessarily be wealthy unless they collected a little more than they were supposed to. And they did that a lot. Hence the reason why they weren't liked. And really, they were less tax collectors and more toll collectors. They would collect tariffs on goods that were being transported through different regions. So, one of the big toll collectors that Jesus' fishermen disciples would have hated and despised was the ones that would take tolls on the fish that you caught. So you at the Sea of Galilee, you've worked hard all day, you've caught all these fish, you're on the way to the market, you have to stop at a booth. And someone like Zacchaeus is at this booth, and he tallies up the tariff that you owe on those fish that you've caught, if you want to sell those fish. Right? We do this today all the time, right? This is part of our culture. We hide it as fees in all of our bills. But there's all sorts of taxes and bills and things. Well, they obviously didn't throw it on your bill back then. You just paid it. Coming and going and this and that. You were constantly paying these things. And now, if that wasn't enough, it was that the tax collectors, the toll collectors, would add on a bit. So you owe 1 shekel, say, for your fish. And they would come along and say, well, you're going to pay 5. I don't owe 5. I only owe 1. Yeah, but these Roman soldiers that are standing here with me will beg to differ. And so you'll pay what you have to pay. Every single time, on and on and on. And everybody involved got their cut, including Zacchaeus. He, by definition of those folks, was not their neighbor. By Jesus' definition, he was what? Neighbor. But because of his actions, because of his group of people, because of his selling out to the Romans, because of his greed, he was despised. And I love in verse 3, so he's there doing his thing. Maybe he's even at his booth. You know, so main road, Jesus is coming in, he's got his toll booth, and Jesus is coming. And when Jesus came through town, we're in Luke 19, so things are happening. He sees Jesus, and it says, or he hears Jesus, and it says, he wanted to see who Jesus was. He wanted to see Jesus. Pause right there. This so-called unneighborly guy wanted to see and know about Jesus. I love that image. There was this desire, this draw to know who Jesus was. And I think people really want to know Jesus. They really want to know that there's something more in this world. And Zacchaeus had that pull. You see, we often think that those people, whoever they are, in this case Zacchaeus, they're just awful to the core, right? Dirty, rotten sinner, there's nothing good in it. And yet there was this strong pull to know Jesus. No one should be written off. But it says, because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. This poor little guy's too short, he can't see over the crowd, right? Can you picture it? He's kind of trying to see. Maybe you've been there, a big mob scene, and you want to see something, and you just can't seem to get there. And so he wants to see Jesus, but he can't. The crowd was, of course, there to see Jesus. But in their zeal to see Jesus, guess what? They denied others the opportunity to see Jesus, right? The crowd does that. If you just search in the Gospels the word crowd, and you'll see that the crowd is not always a positive thing. The mob is not always positive. Whether actively or passively, the crowd created a barrier for Zacchaeus. They blocked his way. Maybe simply because he was short, or as some scholars have said, maybe short was sort of a reference to his reputation. Maybe it was less that he couldn't see, and more that his excuse me's got returned with, you don't know, right? You don't get to see Jesus. Why would Jesus want to see you? Get out of the crowd and go back to your booth. Nobody wants you here. Maybe it was that. Because of his size, his status, his reputation, his sinfulness, regardless of what it was, the crowd prevented him and they became a barrier. And I want to say something that sounds a little harsh, but so very often we in the church are the crowd. We become the crowd. We prevent people from seeing Jesus. Often in our zeal to see Jesus, in our excitement to see Jesus, or in our excitement to see Jesus in the way that we want to see Jesus, or in the fact that, well, the only way I really can see Jesus is this way. And if I don't get to see Jesus this way, then I can't see Jesus at all. And if you don't want to see Jesus the way I want to see Jesus, then get out of here, right? Go over there. We're off in the crowd. In our anger, in our frustration, in our zeal, in our bureaucracy, in all that we do sometimes, or maybe just because we've labeled certain groups unneighborable, we keep people from seeing Jesus. Think about Zacchaeus. It's not his fault. Or maybe we see Zacchaeus and say, well, it's not my fault you're so short. Right? It's not my fault. Maybe you need to work a little harder. It's not my fault you chose to be a tax collector. It's not my fault you're doing things illegally. Maybe if you just followed the law, Zacchaeus, did things right. Take responsibility for your shortness. How's that my problem? You see, we're the crowd. People want to see Jesus and we stand in the way. What if the crowd, what if us, what if people saw Zacchaeus, they saw his desire to see Jesus, and joyfully and with hope they made a path and said, can you believe it? Zacchaeus wants to see Jesus. You know who really needs to see Jesus? It's Zacchaeus. Matter of fact, let's not even make a path. Let's just pass his little body across, right? And get him right up there to Jesus. And plop him right down in front of Jesus. That's what Christ would have us do. And yet so often we say no. Instead, the crowd says, this is not for the likes of you. And then what if, when Zacchaeus says, I want to see Jesus, they said, come forward, Zacchaeus, we will make a way. Where there seems to be no way for you to get to Jesus. And so instead, what does he do? I love this. He runs and he climbs a sycamore tree to see Jesus. He runs and he climbs a tree. What an act of faith, right? Who climbs trees? Well, kids and some of you who act like kids. Isn't that a childlike act, though, for the most part? Some of you shouldn't climb trees. I'm just going to be honest. If I come to the hospital and pray with you because of your broken hip, falling out of a tree, okay, climb a tree. But kids, it's that. Remember that what Jesus said? Unless you change, you become like a child. The whole point here is Zacchaeus is showing this beautiful amount of faith. Maybe more faith than the crowd had. See, you know, there's countless Zacchaeuses in our world. Some who try to climb trees to see Jesus because we prevent them. Or there's some who don't have the ability, who don't have the stamina to run ahead, who don't have enough faith to climb the tree. They walk away and they don't see Jesus. They say, I'd love to see Jesus, but I can't. I don't have what it takes to get there. No one will help me get there. And so you know what? Just walk away. Shame on the crowd in that point, right? And so Jesus reaches. So you know what he does? He runs ahead of the mob, gets in a tree and waits for the processional to come to him. So when Jesus reached that spot, he looks up and he sees Zacchaeus in the tree. I love this image. All these throng of people, and he sees Zacchaeus. It's like the faith connected, right? And he says, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. Can you imagine Zacchaeus? I must stay at your house tonight. Not only I want to shake your hand, I want to have a conversation, or I want to slap you because you're being a bad tax collector, right? Jesus didn't turn over his table. Interesting. His table deserved to be turned over. He didn't turn it over. He walked up to him and he said, why don't you come stay at my house? Of all the people in the crowd, of all those who would have loved Jesus to even just talk to them, could you imagine? You ever been around somebody famous that you really like? Maybe you haven't had that star sighting, but I don't mean somebody famous you don't care about, but somebody that you kind of like and you're like, oh my gosh. And you just kind of hope that they'll say hey or like hi or, even say, and you get kind of excited. You know who I met? This is like 1,000 times more of that. This is the guy that's been healing people and raising people from the dead. I just want him to glance my way. That one lady, remember, she touched the hem of his garment and she got healed. And of all the people in the crowd that were so longing for Jesus, he looks at the worst sinner in the bunch and he says, I want to stay at your house. He says, I'm going to come to your house. He didn't say, Zacchaeus, I want you to meet me later at church on Sunday at 10 a.m. No, I'm going to come to your house. Jesus does not invite, he goes. He extends a relationship to Zacchaeus, one of love and acceptance. And this is a big deal. Staying in someone's house meant you accepted them. Sharing a table, sharing a meal was acceptance. This is offensive stuff. This is revolutionary stuff. This is inappropriate behavior for a good Christian person. Really inappropriate for a good Jewish person at the time. He lost a lot of followers that day. They said, if he's going into that guy's house, I don't want to follow him. How dare he? How dare he do that? I imagine it says, all the people saw this and they began to mutter. He has gone to be the guest of a sinner. So here comes the muttering, right? The grumbling, the judging. Where does it come from? Anger? Jealousy? Jesus should stay at my house. I had a whole bed made up and everything. He's staying at Zacchaeus. You know the kind of people go to Zacchaeus' house? There are Romans there. There are filthy people. He's going there. Jesus breaks down the crowd wall, and they immediately begin to rebuild the wall, don't they? They immediately do. Walls are always built on foundations of muttering, of anger, of jealousy, and fear. It's the bedrock to all good walls. Can't get through here. We don't want you here. And yet Jesus breaks it down. And so Zacchaeus stands up and he says, he's already repenting. They haven't even had a talk. I love this. He says, look, Lord, here I now give half of my possessions to the poor. If I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay it back 4 times the amount. I don't just want to say I'm sorry. I want to make things right. I want to reconcile with my community. I want to restore relationship with those who I've harmed. This is real change, isn't it? This is real repentance. And Jesus looks at him and he says, today salvation has come to this house. Because this man, I wonder if he looked at the mumblers and the grumblers and the angry, jealous people. I wonder if he turned and said, today, he's pointing at Zacchaeus, today salvation has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham. What he did was he took somebody who was already a son of Abraham, was already a follower of God, who was already in, that had been told he was out, and Jesus places him back into the community. He restores him to the community. For the Son of Man did not come to seek and to save the lost. Because this man had faith, because this man repented. Jesus gives us this one final reminder that he came and why he came and why the church exists and why the body of Christ exists. It's to seek and save the lost. And so I want to ask you, who is your Zacchaeus? Who is your Zacchaeus? Who are those people? And I'm using a name because the people that prevented him from getting to Jesus, they knew him personally. He had robbed from them. He had taken from them. He might have hurt and harmed them. He might have had those soldiers beat them for the money he wanted. You know the names of your Zacchaeuses, the people in your life. The people on Facebook that drive you crazy. The smart ones don't go on Facebook. I'm on there. It's hard. It's so hard just to scroll. I just want to, get so angry. I want you to pray. I want you to ask Jesus, Lord, who is my Zacchaeus? Who have I built walls up? And what are the walls that we build in the church? And how can we make straight paths to Christ? Are we going to be wall builders or straight path makers or table makers? We need to go and seek and save, and we need to build relationships. So I'm going to pray, and I want you to consider as we're praying